third graders. Today's learning target is I can make observations of data shown by graphs. So data is the math word for information, and we make data or information easier to see and understand by showing it in graphs. For example, every morning when you take attendance, I get a graph that shows how you guys are all feeling today. It's a quick picture kind of way to show me the information. In fact, it's a math model, just like the ones you made yesterday. So let's take a look at some graphs and how they work, and then we're going to make some observations of graphs. At the very end of this lesson, you're going to give an idea for a question you would like to ask all your classmates and some choices you would like them to choose from. So let's get started. I did it! I got through the whole take to the camera. Okay, time to learn about data and graphs. So this is an example of the kind of graph that I can get from Google Forms. This one's from one of our attendances. The question was, how are you feeling today? And I gave you a bunch of choices. You see these choices every day. When I look at this is a kind of graph called a circle graph or a pie chart, because it's like a pie cut into different colored slices. On this kind of graph, the size of the slices means more people chose that option. So when I look at this circle graph, I can see that most of the class was happy this day. And then the next biggest group was ready to work. All right, feeling good. It looks like 1/4 of the group gave a different answer. Some of you were sleepy. A smaller group, I have to look back over here, were silly. And maybe 1 or 2 of you were sad. So my observations are about how many each chunk had. Questions I might have is, I want to find out who these two or three people are so that I can help them and help them feel not so sad. So just like with the observations and the questions we've been doing in science, you can do that while looking at a graph. Now, you're going to see circle graphs or pie charts around in the world, but we're not going to do a ton with them in 3rd grade. Those are going to come a little later. It's good for you to see them though. In 3rd grade, you're going to mostly work on bar graphs and picture graphs. They show similar stuff. You can see in these pictures that it's the same graph, but one is shown with pictures and one is bars. A bar graph has big rectangle bars, and a picture graph shows the numbers with pictures. In this picture graph, 1 shoe stands for 1. So altogether, in week 1, there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 shoes, because you can count the shoes, or you could go over to the scale on the side. On the bar graph, in week 1, you would just go up to the top and see that there were 5. Most of our work today is going to be with bar graphs, because that's the most common graph you're going to see out in the world. Now you heard me throwing some different graph words around. I'm going to take a second and make sure you know what each of these words mean. These are also the things that you have to have whenever you make a bar graph too. The first thing you have to have whenever you make any kind of graph is a title. In this one, it's Kids Have Pets. That's not the best title in the world. I would have liked some detail about like how many pets kids have or something like that. The important thing though is that this title gives us an idea about what we're going to learn from the graph. It's not dogs are cool. I guess it's about a type of pet, but it doesn't really tell us what the graph is about. You want to make sure your title matches the information in the graph and helps the person looking at it understand what they're looking at. Now we come to labels. A bar graph always has 2 labels, one on the bottom and one on the side. In this case, the one on the bottom tells the kinds of pets, and the one on the side tells the number of kids with each pet. The labels are super important because they tell what information you can get from each side. For example, kinds of pets lets us know that this bar is for how many people had dogs. Well, there's no bar here for snakes. This bar tells us how many people had cats, turtles, fish, and birds. Up the side, we have numbers. The number of kids with each pet. So each time you go up, you get one more pet. That helps us read the graph quickly. We can go, okay, dogs, there were 4. Snakes, 0. Cats, 7. Turtles, 1. Fish, 8. Ooh, excuse me, snuck ahead on the slide there. And birds also 4. So once more, the labels tell what the information on each side says. In this case, the labels on the bottom tell us what the choices were, what kind of animals kids said, and the label on the side tells us how many. You've heard me call these bars a lot. A bar graph has to have the bars on it. They show how many of each kind of data we got. Again, 4 dogs, and so on. Now, the scale is usually used when there's numbers measuring something, like these numbers that count up the side. So, in this graph, it counts by ones. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But you might see graphs that skip count. Maybe it counts by 2s or 5s or 10s. So keep an eye out for that. How many is the scale counting by? If the scale was counting by a different number, it would change how many we would count. On the bottom, the scale down here is more of a kind of label. This label tells us what critter that bar is telling us about. Now, your assignment today is going to be to look at a graph, not this exact same one, and make 4 observations. Your observations need to be complete sentences, so be prepared for that, capitals and periods. Now, your observations could be things like, there are 0 kids who had snakes. That would be one observation. You could say something about both dogs and birds. There are 4 kids that have dogs and birds. That's another observation. You could also talk about which one had the most or the least. In this case, I could observe that fish was the most, so I would write, most kids had fish. The last kind of observation you could make, and you have to make at least one of these observations on your paper, is a comparing observation. That's where you say how many more or how many less one bar has than the other. For example, I'm going to compare cats and dogs. There are 7 kids who had cats and 4 kids who had dogs. So it looks like the difference is 1, 2, 3. My sentence would be something like, there are 3 more kids who had cats than dogs. Do you hear how I made a comparison there? I'll do one more. Let's compare fish and cats. You can see here the difference is only 1. I could say 1 fewer kid, 1 fewer kid has a cat than the kids who have fish. Or 1 less kid has a cat than the number of kids who have fish. So let's take a look at your assignment. Here's the graph that you're going to look at. Be very careful. This graph only has the numbers 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, but do you see how it has lines in between? So the lines count 1, 2, 3, 4. So watch out for that when you're counting the numbers. Down here, the directions say, make 4 observations about the bar graph. One of your observations must compare the numbers in 2 of the columns. Use words like more or less to compare. Write your observations in complete sentences. So here's the place where you can type them. Going back up, our graph tells our favorite sports. The scale on this side tells the number of students, reading that label. This label says sports, and here the choices were soccer, softball, basketball, or other. Other is a choice you sometimes see in graphs and things when it just means anything other than the choices I gave. That's going to matter because the second question on this project is, what question do you want me to ask your classmates? I'm going to use the questions that you give me to eventually have surveys that you guys can answer and graphs that get made that you come up with the topics for. So to do that, first you would need to think of a question like, here I'm going to make it not bold. What is your favorite fruit? You don't have to do that question, that's just the first thing I thought of. Now, do you see how the bar graph has 4 choices? You need to come up with 4 choices for people to answer so that I can make a bar graph with the data you find out. So I'm going to think of 4 choices that I want to offer my classmates. Let's see, we could go apples. Oop, it's bold again. Let's try that. Apples, bananas, plums. I need 1 more fruit. Let's do cherries. And that's how you'd answer that question. Make up a question that you want me to ask you, the rest of the kiddos, and give them 4 things to choose from. Okay, so to sum up, if you have any questions about reading graphs or what the parts are, you can always come back to this video. You're going to use this graph and make 4 observations. Make sure you use complete sentences with capitals and periods, and at least one of them is a comparing sentence that uses words like more or less. Then down here, you come up with a question to ask your friends. That's all for now. I'll see you in the next video.